יפה. It's not windy. So, friends, I want to share a story. And I think 3/4 of you haven't heard it yet. The last time I checked, I shared it in 2016, so I think it's time. Because it's one of my favorite stories, and I wasn't going to write something new for you. No, I would have. I would have wrote something new for you, but I wasn't going to write something new for you. I really do love this story, and I think it's a wonderful story for after Yontif. You know, Ed Feinstein, the rabbi, another rabbi in Los Angeles, conservative rabbi in Los Angeles, always says what the most important day of the whole year in Jewish tradition always says Yom Kippur, and he disagrees. He says the day after, right? So we still need to try and find something that we might be able to connect to. And this story just always moves me. I look at it over and over and over again, and it's actually a really wonderful story about the Bach. Please hold. That's good, right? So it's about the Bach. And the Bach, his real name is Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. And he's one of the greatest Torah scholars in Jewish history. And he was thinking about this idea, when you get to heaven, who would he be sitting next to? And this is an important thing in certain circles. And he was an important, distinguished rabbi. So he wanted to know who he was going to be sitting next to. The idea that in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, that we would actually have neighbors is amazing to me. But also, this really wise rabbi, he wanted somebody important. And so for me, when I first heard this story, this rabbi, the Bach, falls from grace a little bit. Because he's so important, you think in Gan Eden, when you get there, that somebody, you're going to have to sit next to somebody important. But that was the tradition. And so, if everybody has a neighbor in paradise, in this next world, he has a dream about who he was going to be next to. And in this dream, he asks God who this neighbor is going to be, and God gives an answer. And he says there's a rich Jew named Yankala. Naturally, his name is Yankala. And he's Yankala in Lemberg, and he's going to be your neighbor. And the Bach travels all the way to Lemberg, and he's imagining this Yankala is a great scholar, an important man in town. He must study Torah day and night. Really somebody worthy for the Bach to have a spot next to. And the Bach himself, remember, he's devoted. He's a scholar. He's important. People around the world know him. So this Yankala has to be somebody important. So he goes and he knocks on his door. He knocks on Yankala's door. Talk about chutzpah, really. This guy, he goes to his house and he knocks on the door. And he sees that he lives in this beautiful home, and he's a lovely family, and he knows some Torah, and he's a really nice guy, but nothing so special. And he's starting to feel a little disappointed in the inside, and he's there for a whole week, and he thinks to himself, I'm giving my life to God. I'm devoting everything that I have in order to serve God and the Jewish people day and night. And this is what I'm going to have next to me. And he was just about to leave. He was invited to stay longer. The Bach was invited to stay a little bit longer because Yankala was marrying off his son the following week. And so the Bach stays. He stays for the wedding. And the Bach watched the sun under the chuppah, and everything looks beautiful. But then suddenly, Yankala, the boy's father, Yankala, hears somebody just sobbing all the way in the back, crying, really weeping. And it really sounded like it was coming from the depths of his heart. Everyone in town was invited to this celebration, and everybody, including the folks that Yankala didn't even know, certainly the folks that were some of the more poorer folks in town. So he was thinking, who could this be? Who's going to be crying at my son's wedding? So Yankala stops everything and he goes to one of his servants, someone on his staff, to find out who's crying. And the servant returned and he finds that it's a young man, the same age as his son, the bridegroom. And Yankala says, bring him here. And the servant brings him over to Yankala and sees that this is a man who's kind of in tattered clothes and he's not put together like him and his family. But Yankala asks in the middle of his kid's wedding, why are you crying? And this boy asks him, do you really want to know? And Yankala says, yes, please tell me. And the boy says, do you remember somebody who was very established and wealthy in the community who went bankrupt a couple of years ago? And he lost everything. It's a small town. So he says, sure, of course. He says, well, that's my family. And the match that I was supposed to have is getting married to your son. And so he's just been crying, weeping, weeping. So Yankala, of course, goes to the servants and he calls over the bride because she's not under the chuppah yet. Things are still kind of separate in that part of town in those days, right? Men and women. You guys don't know from much of this, but that's what they do in some communities. And he brings over the bride and he says, is this true? And the bride says, yes, it's true. And my parents forbid me from marrying him. And Yankala says, thank you so much for telling me. He turns to his own son. He says, do you hear this? And he says to his son, I'll find you somebody else. I'll find you somebody else. I'm going to find you your soulmate, because they're just matches. They didn't necessarily have so much, of their own voice in this. But for this other young couple, it was a match for years, and they got to know each other, and they did fall in love. So Yankala says, take this boy to the house, to his own son. Take this boy to the house and give him your clothes. This brand new suit. He does that. The boy, they're about to go, and Yankala again says, I want you to know that I'm going to treat you as if you're my own son. All the money and gifts that I was going to give to my son, I'm now giving to you. And when the Bach, this very famous, great esteemed Rabbi Yoel Sarkis, when he would tell this story to his disciples, his students, he would say, I've never seen a father dance at the wedding of his own son with as much joy as this man danced at the wedding of this boy he didn't even know, whom he reunited with his intended bride. And he would also say to his students, when I came to Lemberg, I couldn't understand why Yankala was going to be deserving of a place next to me in paradise. But when I left his home, I couldn't understand how I deserved to sit next to him. We don't hear a lot of those stories. And sometimes there are the stories of real people's lives can move us to realize that can be our story too. I'm not trying to convince you to pay for somebody else's wedding. But can we live with that kind of generosity of spirit? Can we live with a generosity of heart? Can we make this year matter for others beyond our little tiny circles? I hope we try, because things seem so complicated when we leave this tent. The only thing complicated here is to get the equipment to work. But it's not so complicated for me here. There, much more. But I believe in the power of Yankala, so I hope you will too. Your friend's dog